I guess we could probably say that the title of this lesson tonight is a little unusual, about mountains leaping like rams and this sort of thing. The reason I chose that was just because it was unusual, and it's a part of the text here. In some of the things that I read as I was studying over this psalm, I ran into one author that said that this is undoubtedly the most beautiful poem in the psalm that deals with the events of the Exodus. Some of the psalms that dealt with the Exodus of the Jews were very severe and talked about their infidelity and their complaining and things like this. But this psalm is jubilant. This psalm talks about the joy of these people coming out of Egypt. And so I thought we'd just kind of take this as a jumping off place, a springboard to review for a few minutes some of the historical data of the Israelites coming out of the land of Egypt. We don't know exactly how long they had been in the land of Egypt. It was either 215 years or 430 years. But because of some confusion in the text in different places, we're not sure just exactly which that might have been. However long it was, 215 or 400, they multiplied greatly. There was only 70-some people that came down into Egypt with Jacob and his family. You remember the story of Joseph and how Joseph finally brought the whole household and their servants and all down to Egypt. Well, they stayed there for some time. There was an invasion, or had been an invasion, of some people called the Hyksos or the Hyksos. It was not really an invasion, a military invasion. It was just kind of an infiltration. And the first thing you know, these people who came from the north, they took Egypt over. And they were very friendly. They were Semitic people, and they were very friendly and all this sort of thing. They adopted a lot of the things, the customs and the dress and the language of the Egyptian people. But the real Egyptians just hated these people because they had come in, and actually the king was now one of the Hyksos. Joseph came down, and you remember he was made kind of second in command of the whole country after the dreams of Pharaoh and all. And the family of Joseph, Jacob, and family and all that, they were welcome to come down to Egypt. And it looked like, this was just really a good thing. And then the book of Genesis closes with chapter 50 there. When you open the book of Exodus, quite a bit of time has passed by. And the book of Exodus opens primarily with a statement that just says, there arose a king in Egypt who did not know Joseph. Well, it's, again, about 200 or maybe 400 years almost had passed by at that time. And the Egyptians had now conquered the Hyksos and put them out. And the Egyptians were enemies of the Hyksos. And so whoever was associated with them also became the enemies of the Egyptian people. So what did they do? Well, by that time, the Israelites had multiplied greatly, and they were a big force. Now, what's going on in the mind of this Egyptian king? Aha! We may have a situation on our hands here that these Israelites are going to take over our country just like the Hyksos took over our country hundreds of years ago. And so what did they do? Well, they decided they would make slaves out of these people. And so they did. They enslaved the Israelite nation. And a strange thing took place here. A little baby was born, and the law was, the king's edict was that any male children born to any of the Israelite women, that those male children were to be killed. Well, this little baby was born. The mother and father, they wanted to preserve their baby, so they came up with a very unique idea. Let's put him in a little basket and something that'll float, and put him in the river. Just somebody maybe will come along and adopt him. And so they did. They put him among the papyrus reeds that grow there even today in the Nile River. And it happens that's where the princess came to bathe. And she came, and lo and behold, here this little baby is over there in that basket. She sent a servant to get the basket, open the basket up there. There's that little baby, and the baby started crying, which is pretty natural for babies, I guess. He started crying. And the princess took this baby to be her own. And this baby, of course, was Moses. And so Moses now grew up as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And then there was a brother that came along, and his name was Ramesses. And when Moses got to be about 40 years old, he went out to see how his own nation was getting along. We don't know the history of this, his first 40 years of life, but it does say that he wanted to do that. He wanted to go and see what was going on. And he found an Egyptian who was fighting with an Israelite. And Moses killed the Egyptian. And the next day he saw two Israelites fighting together. And so Moses separated them, and one of them said, "Are you going to kill one of us like you killed that Egyptian?" And Moses said, "Uh-oh, people know about what I've done." So Moses ran away. He was 40 years old this time. He went to the land of Midian. And while he was in Midian, he stayed there for about 40 years. So we would think of him as getting kind of old. At least some of us would. I wouldn't think of it that way. But some would think, that he's getting a little bit old. He's 80 years old now. And he was keeping the sheep of his father-in-law. And as he walked by a bush, he saw that bush over there, and it was on fire. But Moses said, "This is not an ordinary fire, because the thing was on fire, but it was not being consumed." And so he said, I'm going to take a closer look at that thing. And as he approached that bush, God spoke to him and says, "Moses, take your shoes off. You're standing on holy ground." And then God said to Moses, "Moses, I've seen the suffering of my people Israel. I want you to go deliver them out of this bondage. Go to the king." Wait a minute. Guess who the king was? Moses' brother, or adopted brother. Moses was the adopted one, but it was Ramesses. And Moses says, "Lord, I can't do it. I stutter." He didn't say that word. He said, "I'm of slow speech." But that generally was an expression used. I stutter. I stammer. I don't speak well. And God said, "Moses, who made your tongue?" God said, "I made your tongue. I can take care of that. Besides, you've got Aaron, your brother. And Aaron he'll be your spokesperson." And then Moses said, "Well, when I get back there, are they going to believe me when I said, 'Oh, God spoke to me and told me to come deliver you'?" And so Moses said, "They're going to say, 'What is the God's name that sent you?'" This is kind of an unusual question, but the name of your God, if you could call the name of your God, in pagan circles, this was thought to be something that gave you a kind of an insight to that God. And so Moses said, they're going to ask me what God sent you. Stop and think now. The Israelites probably were surrounded by these pagans, the Egyptians, worshiped many gods, worshiped the sun god and various other gods, and they probably were polytheistic themselves at this particular time. And so Moses says, who am I going to tell them sent me? And he gives us a great statement there. God says, tell them I am sent you. Now, I don't know the Hebrew language, but linguists say that this is a very unusual statement because of the way it can be translated. It can be translated as I exist, I am, I was, I am, and I will be, and all things like this. But the emphasis here is that God is saying, I am the one who has always been. And so Moses had various other excuses, and finally Moses went. And he presented himself to Pharaoh. See, he knew Pharaoh. He grew up with that guy. And so he said, the Lord said, let my people go to the wilderness and sacrifice to me. And Ramses says, not a chance, not a chance. And you know how the plagues came and all this sort of thing, and the Israelites benefited so much from so many of these things, and the Egyptian people were so scared. They were really fearsome because all of these terrible things were happening. And so when finally the death of the firstborn, the last plague, when that came, Pharaoh says, Moses, take them, get out of here. And so this was all part of the design. They left Egypt. But they didn't leave Egypt by going the shortest route. They're at this city, they went down to this city. And then they moved up to this city. And Pharaoh, when he kind of came to himself, he says, what have I done? I have turned loose all of our slaves. He said, I'm going to go get them. And so he got his army together, and he saw what was happening, that they're lost. They don't know where they're going. They're going from this place to this place to this place, and they don't have any idea where they're going. So, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. That's not in the text. But he said, Pharaoh, he said, I'm going to go get them. Well, they got to the Red Sea, and the people had already done some complaining about we don't have enough to eat, we don't have enough to drink. God provided water from the rock and all this sort of thing, and now they're standing there, mountains on both sides, the sea in front of them, and the army of Pharaoh is pursuing. And they come out and they say, Moses, why didn't you leave us alone? Why did you bring us out here? We're all going to die now. It was better to be slaves back in Egypt. And Moses said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. These Egyptians that you see today, you'll never see them again. And then Moses was told to hold his rod out over the sea, and a strong east wind blew all night. That's the way God parted the sea, it seems. Susquehanna Mill had it going like this, and parting. Maybe that was the way it did. We don't really know. But we do know that there was a strong east wind involved here, and they walked over on dry land. Well, Pharaoh's army said, if they can do it, we can do it. And so the army came into the sea. Moses turned and held his rod out over the sea again, and the sea came back together, and all of the Egyptians were drowned. That was a landmark event in the history of the Jewish nation. Now, when we read this psalm, this poet, this psalmist, is just jubilant over this whole thing. When Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob, from a people of foreign tongue, Judah became God's sanctuary, Israel his dominion. Poetic language to describe the fact that, hey, God dwells with us. We are his sanctuary. We are his holy place. We are the possession of God. He says, Israel is his dominion. And this is such a wonderful idea. Why is it so important? Because, folks, this is the birth of the Israelite nation. We do not see them as a nation until these events took place. We saw them as a family of Jacob, 70 people going down into the land of Egypt. And then the next thing we see, they're slaves, and there are hundreds of thousands of them, has been estimated as many as 2 million. We don't know just how many because the Bible doesn't really say. But now, they begin to have an identity of their own, not as slaves, but as a nation. But wait a minute. More than a nation. We are not just another nation on the map. More than a nation, we are God's dwelling place. God dwells among us. Now, every nation needs a constitution, doesn't it? Every nation needs laws. And so God says, when they got to Mount Sinai, God says, Moses, come up on top of this mountain. I'm going to give you something. Moses went up there and God gave him the 10 Commandments. The Ten Commandments begin with a great statement. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make to yourselves any graven images or likenesses. And the whole idea was, hey, Israelites, you've been surrounded by these pagans. You've been surrounded by these people who have been worshiping all kinds of gods and have all sorts of superstitions. By the way, the pyramids had already been built at the time that Israel came down into Egypt. They had already been built. They were built probably back during before the time of Abraham. And so the tradition, the religious tradition of Israel was very, very important, of the Egyptians, was very important in the history of Israel. And so God brings them out and says to Moses, here's something to take to the people. You shall have no other gods before you. And then he gives them the rest of the Decalogue. And you remember how the people were worshiping the golden calf? Well, that sounds like a terrible thing. It is a terrible thing. But there's more to it than that. You see, they had come out of a civilization, out of a culture that worshiped calves. One of the important gods that they worshiped was represented by a bull calf. And when Moses was gone for over a month, they said, we don't know what in the world happened to him. And they said to Aaron, make us a god. They didn't know what was going on up on that mountain. They didn't know that there's a commandment going to be against many gods. Make us a god. Well, we don't really know just exactly how this all happened, except that Aaron collected their jewelry, their gold, and he made this golden calf. And then he made a terrible statement. Aaron says, "Hear, O Israel, the God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." So you see, Aaron was mixed up about this thing too, wasn't he? But Moses came down from the mountain, and through a whole series of events that took place, God finally gave them his law. Now there's something unusual about this. This is something God never had done this before. God had never taken a nation of people and given them His law. This was a brand new thing. This had a number of different, very important ramifications, and one of them was just simply this: you're my people. I have given you my law. You are now a nation, but you're not just an ordinary nation. You're my nation. You have my law. That makes you not a monarchy, not a democracy, not a kingdom. That makes you a theocracy. That's a God-ruled government. This is your law. Well, all of this was taking place under the care of God. God had provided food for them, manna and quail. He had provided water from them miraculously coming out of a rock. All of this sort of thing. And it was so very, very important to the Israelites because this all was the formation of their nation. They never forgot this. They forgot God, but this was always a part of their thinking and their history. And the Jews always, for hundreds of years, the Jews said, "This is the Lord who brought us out of the land of Egypt." They didn't say who brought our ancestors out of the land of Egypt, who brought those people out of the land of Egypt, but they were so connected to this whole idea that God is within us, God is among us, God is our God, this is God's law, that they, for all generations, they saw themselves identified directly with that event. And so even the Jews today say, God brought us out of the land of Egypt. Why? Because there's such a strong link there between the contemporary Jews and the origin of their nation. For example, I don't talk about I fought the Civil War or I fought in the War of Independence or anything like that. No, I talk about they. They're the ones who do that. The Jews thought of themselves in all generations being identified right there with that great event. Well, they finally left Mount Sinai, and very, very excited. They come to a little place called Kadesh Barnea, right kind of on the border, south border of the land of Canaan. And they sent spies into the land of Canaan, and the spies came back and said, wow, what a country, what a place. God said this is a land flowing with milk and honey, and He sure told us right, because that is a wonderful place. Can't you just see everybody clapping and shouting and all? Oh, just what a wonderful thing God has done for us. But there's a but. It's a wonderful place, but they live in walled cities. There's giants over there. As a matter of fact, one of the expressions that they use is kind of picturesque. It said, we look like a bunch of grasshoppers next to them. They said, there's not a chance that we could go in and take this land. Those 12 spies came back with that kind of a report, except 2 of them. 10 out of the 12 gave that kind of a report. The 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, look at all that God has done for us. The plagues in Egypt, the preservation, the parting of the Red Sea, the providing of the quail and the manna and the things to eat and the water that came out of the rock and all. See all of these wonderful things that God has done. Let's go and take this land. And well, they didn't say this, but this is what we would probably say, baloney. We can't do it. We just can't do it. And so they turned around and God said, well, how long were the spies gone? Well, they were gone for 40 days. And God said, you know what? You are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every day that the spies. And then, they said, we don't like that. Let's go ahead and take that land. And God said, nothing doing. Nothing doing. You can't do it. You rebelled. Now you have to suffer the consequences of your rebellion. But all of this together, the experiences of the wilderness wandering, when that wilderness wandering was finally over and Moses died and Joshua became their leader, they came to the River Jordan. They were going to cross over that river. And it didn't work exactly like the parting of the Red Sea, but it was a little bit similar. They had the Ark of the Covenant, which they had been instructed about at Mount Sinai, and the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant. And as they stepped into the water of the Jordan River, the water flowed away, and there was dry land. And the priests went out into the middle of the riverbed, and the whole nation went across on dry land. And then they took 12 stones from the riverbed and carried them to the other side into Canaan, and they set up a monument of 12 stones. And then they took 12 stones from the shore and carried them back and set them up as a monument in the riverbed. And then the priests went on, and the water flowed on down again. To me, that's just such a thrilling story. And to the Jews, it was such a thrilling story. And so when this poet looks back on that, he is thrilled beyond expression almost as he writes poetically in just 8 short verses, I believe it is, when he writes poetically of this great experience of the birth of that nation, this great experience of the miraculous care that God gave to his people. And it seems that everything is responding to the power of God. Moses was told, strike the rock and water will come out. And then he was told to speak to the rock. And the manna and the quail and the care and all this sort of thing, their shoes didn't wear out during all that time. And the writer of this psalm is just so thrilled because he says to himself, I think, I was part of that. Not just my forefathers, but I was part of that because I am a part of this nation that God has given us. When Israel came out of Egypt, he says, the house of Jacob from a people of foreign tongue. Judah became God's sanctuary, and Israel his dominion. Oh, the sea looked, and it fled. The Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. Why was it, O sea, that you fled? O Jordan, that you turned back? You mountains that skipped like rams and hills like lambs. Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool, the hard rock into a spring of water. That was a part of their history. That was the formation of their nation. Now, what is the upshot of all of this? Folks, we have to see ourselves in the same light. We have to see ourselves not as just, quote, Church of Christers, not as just a congregation. We need to see ourselves as the family of God, the nation of God, not a political nation, but he's given us his word. He's given us his law, not political laws like he gave to them, not military laws, not civil laws and criminal laws the way he gave to them, but he's given us his law of ethics and morality of the doctrinal issues, let's think of ourselves not as just an isolated small group of people. Let's think of ourselves instead as a part, I like the song we sang a moment ago, a part of the mighty fortress that God himself is. And we are a part. We are a part of his intent for the world. So when the mountains skipped like rams and the hills like lambs, this is this poet's beautiful expression of the presence of God, the care that God gave them, and the jubilation of these people as they saw themselves in the hands of God, accomplishing his will, obeying his voice, and finally reaping the reward that God gave them in the land of Canaan. We're going to stand now and sing an invitation song. If you are in any way subject to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to respond. Let's stand together, please, while we sing.